Remember when the Detroit Lions felt like the gift that kept on giving? The team you circled on every calendar, the one that finally seemed built to last? That was barely 2 years ago. Now, after a Thanksgiving loss that felt less like a stumble and more like a cold, honest mirror, the question in Detroit isn't, how do we win the division? It's, is the Super Bowl window we thought we had already closing? The thing about windows is they look bigger from the inside. In 2023, the Lions had momentum, talent, and timing. Jared Goff playing at a high level, an offensive line anchored by Penei Sewell and Frank Ragnow, rookie machines like Aiden Hutchinson and Sam Laporta emerging, and a culture that felt, finally, durable. The math looks simple. Keep developing the core, keep the coaching stable, and you're not just building a contender for 1 year. You're building a team that can stay dangerous for years. Fast forward 22 months, and the math got messy fast. The Packers, once thought to be lagging, now look reborn under Jordan Love. The Bears, with Ben Johnson now running things in Chicago, have reemerged. The Vikings are a quarterback decision away from contending again. What looked like a wide-open NFC North 2 seasons ago has tightened into a real fight. And Detroit's 31-24 loss to Green Bay on Thanksgiving felt like the moment the balance of power got nudged back. You can make a list of individual problems, and you should, because they add up into a pattern. The first big one is the coaching shuffle. Ben Johnson leaving for the Bears after helping architect one of the NFL's more creative offenses has left a visible hole. John Morton didn't land like a perfect replacement, and then Dan Campbell taking back play-calling duties has produced some head-scratching moments. Coaching isn't just X's and O's, it's identity. The Lions suddenly feel like they lost a dialect they'd been fluent in for 2 seasons. Plays that used to hum now stutter. Timing with Jameson Williams and David Montgomery has been inconsistent. The flow that turns sets into points evaporates in moments. Second, the defense has become an uneven thing, pressure without finish. The front can push the pocket, but sacks vanish when it matters most. Coverage breaks up big plays at the worst times. You saw it on Thursday. Detroit gave up 31 points even when the roster was mostly healthy. That's not a fluke. It's the sign of an underlying problem with execution and, frankly, some schematic brittleness. When your defensive line generates pressure but can't finish, the opposing quarterback still has time to make the play that counts. Then there's the injury noise, which never helps but also shouldn't be a permanent excuse. Amon-Ra St. Brown exiting in the first quarter and tight ends Laporta and Brock Wright missing the game matters. Starting backups at center and left guard matters. Football is brutal that way. A roster built to climb a mountain can stumble on a few missing picks, but even accounting for injuries, some of the calls and moments in Detroit's loss felt like self-inflicted wounds. Take the late fourth quarter sequence. Detroit fights back, kicks a field goal to make it 31-24, but the clock math that follows was odd. They ate most of the remaining time on a possession that left Green Bay enough seconds to march into a killer first down and kneel out the game. That's management, not luck. And when you're arguing playoff seeding with teams that make fewer mistakes, those kinds of decisions add up fast. Let's not pretend the Lions are falling apart overnight. Their core is still largely intact. Contracts are in place for many of the young stars. The ceiling remains. But 2 things make the situation urgent. 1, rival teams improve faster than anyone expected. Jordan Love and that Packers staff closed in astonishingly quickly. 2, internal rhythm. The blend of coaching, play design, and execution is brittle enough that a handful of bad decisions and missed assignments can turn a 15-2 dream into a 7-5 scramble in less time than fans want to admit. So what's the realistic path forward? Start small. Fix micro problems and trust compounding improvement. Game management is coachable. Play calling rhythm can be rebuilt. The defense can learn to turn pressure into sacks again. The front office can look at tweaks, maybe roster depth, maybe a coaching assistant who can return some of that lost creativity to the offense. If the Lions can blunt the immediate slide and reestablish the identity that drove them to the NFC title game 2 seasons ago, the window doesn't slam shut. It just narrows. But narrowing is scary when every remaining game reads like a gauntlet. The schedule won't hand Detroit easy breaths either. A surging Dallas Cowboys team comes next. followed by road tests and matchups that feel more punishing than forgiving. Those are not the weeks you want to be trying to rebuild your DNA in public. Every loss makes the climb steeper. Every close call that goes the other way chips at the confidence that was so carefully accumulated in 2023. And then there's the psychological angle. Teams that believe in themselves genuinely behave differently late in games. They conserve time, they buy margins, they trust the small plays that add up. When you watch Detroit now, there's an odd mix of talent and hesitation. Players who can make headlines in a structure that sometimes doesn't put them in the simplest positions to succeed. That tension is fixable, but it requires a reset that isn't purely technical. It's cultural. It's about who's allowed to make the game-deciding call at 2:30 left on the clock. Here's the honest center of it. The Lions' Super Bowl window is not a literal thing that closes with one loss, but its edges get sharper every week. The team lets rival clubs improve faster. Every week, their in-house coherence phrase, and every week, critical game management and defensive execution fail to match their talent. If Detroit corrects course, if coaching stabilizes, if the line settles, if the defense starts finishing, that window reopens. If not, this team risks being a really good squad that peaked early and never recaptured the momentum needed for a title run. Dan Campbell said the blunt truth after the game: "We dug ourselves a little bit of a hole." That's the understatement that matters. Holes are fixable, but not all holes are created equal. Some are shallow and patched in a week. Others require excavation and structure. For the Lions, the next 5 games are less a reporter's narrative and more a live exam. How they answer will tell us whether this was a temporary slip, a teachable moment, or the start of a longer decline. If you want the image to carry home, remember the taste of the scoreboard after Thanksgiving. A team that once felt like the future, now standing at a crossroads, watching rivals pass with the same stride they once hoped was theirs. The good news? The Lions still have the pieces. The harder news? In today's NFL, having pieces isn't enough. How you use them, how you protect them, and how quickly you adapt to rivals who've closed the gap will decide whether this franchise's supposed window was a brief sunrise or the start of a real season. Jordan Love faced 4th and 3 with the whole stadium buzzing, and Dontavian Wicks turned it into his own Thanksgiving highlight reel. He launched himself into the air with 2 shoes, came down with one, and still snagged the game-sealing catch with Brian Branch all over him. First down secured, clock drained, Packers win 31-24. Wicks left his right shoe behind like a casualty of war, and Matt LaFleur ran over and hugged him like he'd just adopted him. Hard to blame him. Wicks had his best game of the season when the Packers needed it most. 6 catches, 7 targets, 94 yards, 2 touchdowns. Before today, he hadn't reached the end zone all year and barely cracked 200 receiving yards. Then Thanksgiving arrived, and Wicks decided to become the Lions' personal nightmare. His first touchdown was a beauty. The second came with a little more controversy, but they both counted the same. And with Jordan Love throwing 4 touchdowns, the Packers looked as dangerous as they have all season. Now Green Bay is 8-3-1 and watching the Chicago Bears Black Friday game. Whether Chicago wins or loses, next week's Packers-Bears matchup suddenly feels massive. And if Dontavian Wicks keeps making plays so good he loses his shoes, the NFC North might need to tighten up.